The last few months, my co creator on Rat Queens, Rock, and I have been talking about the success of the project. It was about 13 years ago, actually, that we started working on the original idea. And when we were moving on to our next project, which eventually became Bronze Heart, something that we're quietly working on in the background, we revisited what worked about Rat Queens. And it kind of got us into a place where we were breaking down this series into its component parts to understand why it connected with people. We came up with a lot of interesting ideas. Right place, right time. There wasn't really anything quite like it on the market at the time. Fantasy wasn't something that traditionally sold well. So maybe it stood out in the genre. Also, we had four female leads, which hadn't really been done before either. It was usually a male-dominated market. Um, Conan and even D&D comics to that point. And it was something that Rock both and I loved, the genre of fantasy and in particular role-playing games, high fantasy role-playing games. And we talked about it at length for a while. And I don't think we really came up with a definitive answer. But I think we found some compelling reasons why it did well. Recently, I was watching a talk by Robert Kurtis. He was the lead writer and creator of Disco Elysium. He was talking about world building. And he quoted a friend of his when he was talking about how when you build a world, you need to test it out that it can hold both comedy and heartbreak. It's a really fantastic talk. If you can find it on YouTube, I highly recommend it. Robert Kurtis talking about the importance of world building. But in that moment, he quoted a friend of his who said, "No one reads anything for any reason than love." And I thought that was really interesting. When I reflected on that, going back to Rat Queens, I can see how that fits. Another realization I had recently is authenticity. I'm looking right now at two Joe Shuster awards on my wall. They are the Canadian Comic Book Awards for Excellence. They are, for me, in 2012 and 2014. One was for Green Wake. I've mentioned that one before. And one for Rat Queens. Now, I'm not bringing this up to brag. They're very old. It's for a very specific point, today's topic. Rat Queens was pure passion, and it was a parody in some sense, or a loving light touch on something that was big in my life. Role playing games, sitting around telling stories with my friends, and also a loving friendship between the four protagonist characters. People were able to see themselves in those characters. I have numerous stories of people coming up to my table at conventions and saying, "This is our friends group, and Betty is me, and my friend is Hannah." And I think back to that quote, and I think it rings true. Green Wake was a story about divorce, feeling lost, and real grief. It was raw for me to write that story. It was really hard because I was reflecting on the loss of potential, possibilities, what could have been, and what it ended up being. And you know my story. After Rat Queens, I kind of became obsessed with repeating that success, but I was simply trying to copy the formula, thinking that the craft, the concept of a team of characters, comedy, action, hijinks, that was the thing that brought people back time and again to Rat Queens. But it was pure craft. Sure, the writing was good, the art was excellent in these projects after, but I had nothing to say beyond the story itself. There wasn't a second layer of meaning. I never want to Schuster again. I'd lost my authentic voice and I was chasing some kind of financial success or trying to repeat something that was authentic with something that wasn't. That's what I realized. Today's topic is art and what it requires and why it's so important today. It is love and authenticity. It's not just craft. Art speaks to something deeper, more meaningful things, experience, what you have endured, and perspective, how you see the world now because of it. This is art. It's more important than ever when we live in an inauthentic world of masks and perfect moments. And love is merely a feeling that fades and is no longer an act of commitment and service, body, mind, and soul to another. Welcome to the Sons of Men podcast, a conversation dedicated to meaning in the lives of men, offering a window into the trials of masculinity where we talk about family, spirituality, creativity, and legacy to better understand each other and to offer solutions for the next generation in an increasingly shallow and hostile world. I'm your host, Kurtis Wiebe, a father and husband, addict in lifelong recovery, and an advocate for men struggling in the shadow of suffering. This is episode 13, The Beauty of Truth. One of the things that I noticed when I moved to Europe, and I think it was something that was just in the background that took time to really register with me, was this idea of the separation of craft and art. I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit about a shift in perspective. Again, that is integral into the experience of not only creating art, but experiencing it. Well, I grew up in North America. I remember even when I was younger, I was really into music. I was in a band in high school and I wrote poetry, embarrassingly bad poetry. I used to have copies of it that I had been carrying around with me for years when I was moving from place to place, but eventually I parted ways. Part of me wishes I hadn't. It's always fun to revisit those times, but I really had this sense that art was trivial and a waste of time. There's no money in it. Of course, that's the number one priority, right? That's really what brings things meaning. It was a frivolous pursuit, something to do on the side, of course, but get a real job. And also, in most North American cities, the buildings that we see every day, they are very much to one purpose: just make it cheap and sell that building for a lot of money. There's not really something that lasts the ages. I think so much of the architecture we see in North America will be dated within 10 to 15 years. And we see that all the time. It kind of put money at the top of those kinds of pursuits. It was just merely to serve a simple purpose: make money. And it was kind of the same mentality in comics. Again, I didn't even realize this until I stepped away from that world, but comics were treated as, and still are, to be honest, disposable and cheap and very unappreciated how much hard work goes into creating something that you can read in 15 minutes and then toss it in the trash. Artists have become conveyor belts, industrial machines. They're often pushed to extreme conditions, and the pay is terrible for the amount of hours and hard work that they put in. But we just accepted that. 20 pages, 25 pages a month for a comic book? Yeah, of course. That's just the way the standard of the industry is. Why else would you do it differently? But I think that was shocking to look back on after spending some time in Europe. The architecture in Stockholm is beautiful. And I realized that there was a time when craft and art were once one. It was evident everywhere in the city that when they built these buildings, they were looking to inspire people hundreds of years down the line because they were saying something with every cut and every angle. And every additional piece that they added to it, they sought to inspire people generations to come. And they remain beautiful to this day. Old Town, Gamla Stan in Stockholm is a marvel, hundreds of years old, but more beautiful than ever. Comics, the same. Europe is a much different scene than it is in North America. They are given an immense amount of time to create. I remember reading that the creators working on this comic book series called Meta Barons, that the artist Jimenez was given a week to do a single panel, let alone a page. Now, remember what I said earlier, North American comic book artists are expected to do minimum 5 pages a week. And here we are, one panel a week in the European market. Now, that might be an extreme edge case, but generally, that was known to be how long it took to create something of beauty. And they were paid quite well because Europeans view comics as art, as meaningful, as giving voice to someone who has something to say. It's not just a story. Now, don't get me wrong, Europe has its problems, but this is for the sake of this argument about understanding the importance of art and how meaningful it is. It was something that woke me up to learning a better way of not only perceiving it, but trying to champion it. Okay, so I'm going to define now what I mean by all these different terms so that you understand what I mean by art in general. And I think there's a lot of different perspectives on this, of course. This is only mine, the one that I've come to after years of making it myself. It's two components. It's craft, as I said earlier, and for some reason in the modern age we've separated craft from meaning. But craft is your experience, your time spent. It's the physical skill. It's the rote memory language that you can translate from your mind to the page or to the word or to the wood, the sculpt, whatever it is that an artist creates. But pure craft alone leads to copying or derivative work. You can use other sources as inspiration, but without adding anything that is definitively you, well, in the instance of what I'm working on with Rock, Bronze Heart, it would just be kind of a weak Star Wars or Dune. But it has that special ingredient that is the creative spirit between Rock and myself. We also live in an age of AI. Craft isn't enough anymore. I do find it really strange that of all the things AI could have done for us, human beings, the first thing that was made public was writing and art. It now somehow further devalued art, almost as a priority. I'm not going to get into how cynical and maybe terrifying that is, but it has turned what thousands of hours and of training, patience, and struggle has now been instantaneously reduced to a single command on a computer. And a lot of artists now are asking, what hope is there? Concept artists working in the video game industry, I have been seeing game pitches that once would have been completely filled out by original concept art has just been 100% replaced with AI art because it's cheap, it's fast, it doesn't require any effort. So, what hope is there? We're doomed, right? No. Perspective. These are the experiences of our life, the sufferings that we go through, the triumphs, the journey of life, and how we see those values. You know, two artists can see the same topic from completely different perspectives. Someone might see a forest landscape and see the dark shadows and the sinister nature of what lies hidden beyond. and another might see the full range of color of the leaves, of the sunlight through the trees. That's perspective, and that's what makes one idea completely different in the hands of two different voices. But each of those artists is equally important because they bring a fresh perspective, an original thought to the same topic. Okay, why bother with any of this? What does it matter? Who cares, right? I posit that we live in a dying age of art where it is becoming meaningless. Have you noticed how everything is called content these days? Have you noticed that stories have been copying each other, with each copy becoming weaker and weaker and weaker? I can think of a few franchises like that: Star Trek, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. They're not getting better, they're getting weaker and worse. And I posit that a lot of it is because the people doing the work don't love it and don't have anything fresh to say about it. So, why does it matter? Because real art brings us closer to the truth. If art requires commentary on love, in some capacity, it requires humans to be more real. It gives us a deep feeling of accomplishment. And I want to make it clear, art is anything that is creating something new with passion and intent and reveals something about its creator. I've mentioned my friend Chad before about all these beautiful talents that he has. From his saunas that he creates by hand and adds a little cut of flair to each one, to a poem by Walt Whitman about the ageless wonder of nature. In both, we sense what is important or brings joy to both of these men. They are both artists. And art isn't just for artists, it's for everyone because it is a mirror. It reflects the human condition back to us and allows us to connect with and, I would say, relate to it in a personal way. It can genuinely transform us. And I know that sounds pretentious, but those stories or those experiences with beauty, I can guarantee you have had some in your life, whether it was a song or a short story, a film, a sculpture. You felt something and you stopped for a little bit longer and just contemplated. That is the power of something beautiful, of something that conveys truth. I want to give you an example to close. I was living in Sweden when I saw the movie The Northman by Robert Eggers. And it's weirdly a movie that is quite polarized. I've experienced conversations with people that said that they hated it and thought it was derivative and boring and had nothing new to say. And for me, it was quite the opposite. The Northman is a Viking story about, well, a family wrapped in a cycle of violence. It is a revenge story about a young boy who lives his whole life determined to avenge the death of his father. A lot of the recurring theme is how he has many opportunities to break that cycle that has clearly been part of his family and his clan for generations, but he's unable to do it until he experiences love. In that story, I saw my cycle of addiction and it stung my heart. I could see all of the emotions that the main character was carrying with him, but they were directly related to my struggle with addiction, of always falling back into it. And the story of love, a woman that offered him an alternative, a new way. a life free of the cycle. And you know what happened? I realized that I had been with my partner then for 10 years and we still weren't married. And it made me reflect on how much we had been through together and how close we really were, how strong our relationship actually was. And it wasn't long after that we got married. That's the power of art. And it's everywhere around us. And we need to understand and begin to value the people that commit their lives to this. And it's a huge reason why I'm starting my own publisher that values art for all of these reasons that I mentioned here, and trying to change the way not only the artist themselves thinks about the importance of their work, but the audience. So I would like for you to reflect on beauty and experiences with artistry that has really moved you or changed your thinking, changed the way you see the world. That is what great art is capable of. And I would also encourage you to pursue your own. As I said, art is anything that speaks to your voice. It can be woodworking, it can be writing, and it can be sharing thoughts or things that you're going through in straight up journal. Craft, learning how to use your tools, experience, adding that authentic voice and the things that you've gone through to make it original and to make it something that people can relate to. Because at a level, we're all going through the same thing here on this planet. And art is a great way for us to share and connect with those experiences. So watch a good movie, listen to a good band, maybe try poetry, something we all scoff about these days, but was the main form of artful communication for thousands of years. Something that I've been getting in touch with recently and really enjoying. So try to find someone that you like. Maybe try a Walt Whitman. And until the next time, God bless.